All right.
Okay, we'll call the Wednesday, August 14th, Troy Planning Commission meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. McGarry.
Here.
Mr. Wolfe.
Here.
Mrs. Early. Mr. Titterington.
Here.
Mr. Westmeyer.
Here.
Mayor. Mr. Emery. There is a quorum.
Okay, the minutes have been sent out to everyone. Are there any comments, revisions, or deletions?
Move to approve. Second.
We have a motion to approve and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And, no opposition. The minutes are approved. Okay, the next, first item is the historical district application. It's an item for 15 South Market Street. It was tabled at the last meeting. The first issue was we need to remove from the table if the commission wishes to discuss it.
I guess I'm a little hesitant to remove it from the table since there are 4 of us, which would require a unanimous vote for approval. Otherwise, we have a disapproval. Is that not correct?
That's correct, sir, yes.
This is the 3rd time we've discussed this.
I recognize
Would be.
that.
I'll make a motion to remove it from the table.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion to remove from the table and a second. All in favor of removing it from?
Roll call.
Oh, for, yeah, well, a roll call vote for removing it from the table.
Mr. Wolke.
Yes.
Mr. Titterington.
Yes.
Mr. Westmeyer.
Yes.
Mr. McGarry.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Okay, is there anything new, or could you bring us up to date then?
The applicant provided some spec sheets for the proposed product, and then some additional information about staining versus painting the brick. Not sure where the source came from the stain versus brick, but I did include it in your packet. Really, our recommendation is staying the same due to the design manual and the Secretary of Interior standards. Really trying to keep that original look of the front facade. It's pretty straightforward in our opinion in both the design manual and Secretary of Interior standards, and that's really all I have to add.
Okay, are there any comments or questions for staff?
Well, the design manual talks about not painting a unpainted building.
Correct.
Does it say anything about not staining a non-painted?
It doesn't specifically say, however, the Secretary of Interior standards say paint or other surface coat. So, we did reach out to SHPO, tried to get some additional information and really their opinion on it. Haven't got a response back from them. I sent them a couple emails and left a few phone calls. So, that is our interpretation of the Secretary of Interior standards.
But not the design standard.
Not our design manual.
Any other comments or questions for the staff?
I just have one question. On the information that was submitted, where did that come from?
That came from Bryant Brothers, the guy who does the historic preservation around town,
But he didn't
the contractor.
He didn't provide any letter to say, I recommend this, or?
He just sent an email saying basically this is exactly what I would recommend doing. It would help prolong the life of it. It would help protect it.
We don't have the email or any reference.
I can forward it to you. But I basically what I'm asking for is if I could get grandfathered in, because you just voted on the 13 side, which is unpainted brick, and I'm allowed to do that side.
That's not unpainted brick.
Yes, it is.
It is unpainted brick, but the reasoning that we recommended approval is because there's no contributing features on the 13 side. The 15 side has the soldiers, et cetera.
And if they stain, it won't cover the mortar. That stuff will still stand out. It won't change the look. The brick will look like it's always been that way.
Now, here's what you submitted. You're saying that the reliefed area which, best I could, recall, around that Thompson behind it, that's not brick, right?
I believe,
Limestone?
yeah, limestone, it's carved.
Okay, and you're saying that would not,
No,
what's gonna keep that masonry?
I'm not gonna paint it.
Okay,
Okay, but everything else is gonna be painted,
Or
even though it's gonna
stain
be stained.
I'm not gonna stain that feature and
Right.
what do you call them? Right, brick?
Soldiers, brick soldier.
The brick soldiers, if the mortar's not color, they're gonna look exactly like they do now. They'll still stand out. They'll still,
to make sure
They'll
I
actually
understand,
probably
what
stand out more.
exactly are the brick soldiers, so I understand that?
they're upright brick along the window.
Vertical
The vertical ones along the window?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought,
So it won't change the look of that. If anything, it'll make it pop.
okay.
Okay, but the other brick though, when it's stained, it's going to be a color, it's not going to be a transparent stain, that's going to be a colored
Correct.
brick.
I guess I'd like to distinguish between what paint does and what stain does. Paint covers things, correct?
And it stops the moisture out, it blocks it, and it can damage the mortar, it can damage the brick. This is a hand stain where each brick is individually stained. It doesn't affect the mortar,
Okay.
and it
now-
allows the brick to breathe.
Now, bricks come in a multitude of colors. How do they get that multitude of colors? Don't they stain them?
In
No,
the mix,
It's when they're baked,
yeah.
I would think.
Yeah,
But isn't it through a stain that creates the color?
It's probably like they stain concrete now.
No,
It
well,
depends
no,
on the
it's mixed
material, I
in,
think.
yeah, it's
Depends on the,
in the material itself when it's
The clay.
first
but, yeah.
fire baked.
Right, but don't you put a stain into it to create the color?
Into it,
Yes.
not on it, not on top of it, but into it.
Basically, this would be a mineral that sits on the outside of the brick that allows the porous nature to remain the same. It only changes the color. It doesn't affect the permanence of the brick, it doesn't damage the brick in any way. Breathable, it's friendly to it. And being allowed to paint the 13 side makes less sense than staining the brick.
Well, again, I'm seeing a difference between what paint does, which covers things, and as you say, seals it in, whereas a stain changes the color, which, in my mind, that's how you get the original color when the brick is manufactured, is by adding a stain to it.
Right.
a portion of our, really what our guidelines and Secretary of Interior standard is really trying to do is protect the brick of it. The second element of it is to keep that original look and feel. By adding the stain, you are changing the look, right? Whether it's breathable, yes, it is a better product than paint is in terms of the safety protecting the brick, making it breathe. Limestone mortar joints, yes, I will agree with that. The other element is the look and characteristics of the original facade is what we're trying to maintain, and that's the second portion of our recommendation.
So, in what I'm hearing, that we're disapproving this because we don't like the color that it's going to end up being, or we don't like the process by which it gets there?
I'm not really giving a particular opinion on the black color. I'm more so giving an opinion on we're trying to protect the original look and characteristics of the front facade.
So it's the act of painting, not the color itself. That would be a different discussion if we got through the act of painting or the act of staining, whichever. The act of covering, if you will.
I guess I see a fundamental difference between stain and paint.
It's still a covering, and the
But
interior.
one covers, one is absorbed.
No, if it was absorbed, that goes back to my question about the stain. Is the stain going to show a color, or is it transparent stain?
No,
It's not just a protective, it's gonna show color. which means it's going to change the look of the brick, which is, to Austin's point, part of the reason that the staff is recommending against painting, or staining in this case.
But again, the 13 side was approved.
I have one other question. I mean, you say you're gonna maintain the feature at the top, like the Thompson feet.
Yes.
Was it just the lettering that you were not going to cover, or the entire, there's a recess?
Anything you don't want covered, I won't cover.
Well, I just wanna make sure I'm clear with what we're looking at in the proposal. Is it?
I will
The
leave,
only picture I
That's
saw
your
was.
proposal.
I will leave,
Right, that's the only thing I saw.
That's the proposal still,
Yeah.
right?
That's a proposal outside of the corrugated metal sign,
Well,
et cetera.
Yeah, we're talking about the stain.
The limestone has to change, because that's the first thing.
What are the wishes of the commission?
I'm not going to try to predict the vote. Well, I guess maybe I am predicting the vote, but I'm not seeing a unanimous approval here. Therefore, to make a motion to approve it, which would fail, the motion fails. So I'm not gonna make a motion to approve.
Now, if there's no motions made, then it dies and has to go back through the process of being resubmitted, right?
Correct.
Do I understand it?
Is that considered a denial, or what's the process
You would have to
on that?
formally make a motion and vote on a denial or approval.
Otherwise what? Otherwise, we're gonna be here till 10 o'clock tonight, or
You
what?
can table it again to our next meeting. I would not encourage that due to the applicant's time, but
Yeah, I can't remember. Do you remember?
Well, I guess a motion to deny would be in order if anybody wants to make that one.
I think we're supposed to make motions in the affirmative, right?
I know with BZA it's supposed to be that way. Is that also with the planning commission?
That is normally what has been stated as how motions should be made, whether it's before council or another body.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, I have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Can I ask one additional question?
Yes.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
If they stained it but without a color, can you stain it without changing the color?
it'll change, or what,
No
and I
matter
don't
what,
know,
it just-
this one's probably oil-based. Oil-based has a darker tint to it, so
It
even if
just
it's-
naturally is gonna somehow change?
it will naturally change.
All right, sorry.
Now, if, a motion dies for lack of a second, that kills the application, right?
Correct, and she would need to alter the application a little bit to come back.
Right, we can't take the same thing back.
Yeah.
So we have a motion to approve. We lack a second.
Well, if there were a second, we would at least vote on it.
Right.
I'll make a second so we can vote.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the application.
And again, I did submit, like I said, I got these drawings done before the design standards were in place. That's why I would be to consider grandfathering it in.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Titterington?
No.
Mr. Westmeyer?
No.
Mr. McGarry?
No.
Mr. Wolke?
Yes.
The motion fails.
Okay. Now I gotta get my paper squared away here. Next item of business is Halifax Villas Plan Development.
No.
We jumped along, Mr.
You
McGee.
jumped
Oh,
number
I'm sorry,
4.
I'm sorry. Too many papers in front of me right now. Historical District application, certificate of appropriateness for 10 North Market Street, painting of the building. Staff have a report.
Yes, sir. Annalise Kimmel of 3 North Ridge LLC is requesting review of application for painting of the building at 10 North Market Street. Property is zone B3, Central Business District. As a note, the building was previously painted in 2017 to include the colors of beige, pure white, and bronze. The applicant is proposing to paint the paneled frieze at deluxe light bronze, number 244. The main body color on the second story is proposed to be painted pure white. The main body color on the first floor is proposed to be painted iron ore. You can see those samples in the graphics. I also have some additional if you need to review them. The design manual 2.6 states that concentration of similar colors in the same box should be avoided. Historically unpainted surfaces should not be painted, while historically painted surfaces should remain painted. Simpler buildings should have a simple color scheme. Matte, flat, or semi-gloss paint should be used, and avoid high gloss paint. In all circumstances, avoid bright and obtrusive colors. Staff recommends approval based on it meeting section 2.6 of the design manual. That concludes our report.
Okay, now this building's being painted, but it already has been painted?
Yes.
Correct.
Yep.
Any other discussion with staff?
You have the actual swatches.
The light bronze is in there. The light bronze? No, it's not a Sherwin-Williams color. But
They're taking a mixture of the existing colors and kind of flip-flopping them.
Say that again?
They're taking, so these colors are currently on the 10 North Market Street building. They're really flip-flopping the main body color to make it white.
They're just flip-flopping them, is what,
Yeah.
the current colors, are they're flip-flopping?
Yes, yes.
All right, but you say you don't have the light bronze and the antique on here?
Wasn't one of the
No.
colors.
Not Sherwin-Williams.
Well, okay, but we still wanted those colors. We got in trouble once before when we approved a taupe, and it really wasn't the taupe that we thought it was. And since that time, we were supposed to be getting swatches from all these.
Yes, sir. We put a little bit of trust in the applicant because it's the colors that are currently there. They're just swapping those out.
Because they're the current colors, all right, I get that. Jim, did you wanna see it? Jim, did you wanna see black and white?
No.
I'm trying to get these things back on, I don't know why.
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Westmeyer?
Yes.
Mr. McGarry?
Yes.
Mr. Wolke?
Yes.
Mr. Titterington?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Okay. Now number 5, Halifax Villas Plan Development. As I understand, it's a minor change in Halifax Villas and Patio Homes Plan Development.
Yeah, so this is just specific to phase 2. I passed out the record plat for this phase. We're literally just changing the title, to the Cottages of Halifax subdivision. And that's really the only change that the applicant's proposing. This is really to make sure it's consistent with the CNRs of the, phase 2 of the PD.
So this rename will only apply to phase 2?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve, is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. McGarry,
Yes.
Mr. Wolke,
Yes.
Mr. Titterington,
Yes.
Mr. Westmeyer,
Yes.
approved.
Sounds wonderful. Okay, status report on the updated comprehensive plan. Turn that over to Austin.
You gonna turn that back on?
Yeah, we're gonna one.
Oh. Change, yeah. No, not a whole new record plan, thank you. You want some lights off?
Yep.
Some lights off, please, thank you.
Dark enough? Can't see without my glasses on.
Blurry.
I'm familiar with it. There's a lot on this one. Let's see, planning commission. There we go. All right. Let me get the, can't find exactly because of that chair.
You can just do it up top.
Can I do it?
Slideshow.
Is that one?
Yeah, it's on the main menu.
I'll let you find that one. I usually do it.
Yeah. All right. Were you gonna do an intro, or just want me to get rolling?
I can do an intro.
Okay.
So we're about 85 to 90% complete of our, really the first phase of our comp plan. So we're pretty excited to present this update. Just to enter into the record a plug for tomorrow, we're having our town hall event at the junior high library tomorrow from 6 to 8. So this will be more of the, I guess, factual presentation tonight and then more informal tomorrow. So with that, I give you Matt O'Rourke.
Right, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you again. One quick programming note, I'm getting past a head cold, if you can't hear it in my voice, so if I cough or my voice cuts out, I apologize in advance, but I've been drinking a lot of water, so I think we'll be okay. I'm glad somebody else made some noises. It won't be just me up here. That's great. Quick overview of what we plan to do this afternoon and walk through you. Austin mentioned it. We're getting close, kind of the final stretch for the comprehensive plan portion of this. We're going to be talking about that, kind of just a real recap on where we're at to date, what's already been presented to this and to the advisory group, and then really hitting on what we call our critical path strategies, which is the implementation plan. That is the most recent part that has been delivered to staff for review. We'll be talking about that with the advisory committee tonight, and really represents kind of the foundational steps of the main themes that came out of this and what we'd like to see done in the next 5 or so years. With that, we are transitioning. It's hard to believe we started over a year ago already, but it's been a year. We're transitioning kind of from wrapping up the comp plan into going full tilt into what we're calling Unified Development Code rewrite. That's kind of on the tail end of this process, but we've already been working on it, ready to get going, and sort of the focus from this point on will really be more on that process. So we're going to go into a little bit of what that looks like and what we've done and where that's going as well. So really quick, we've been doing a lot of drafting, writing, delivered an existing conditions report. Excuse me. But wanted to highlight again on this slide just how much public engagement was part of this process. Having advisory group meetings, online survey responses. I think we finally figured out our TikTok dance video yesterday because we broke the 600 record. So it might involve a strawberry suit, just as a little bit of a preview. You know, we had a lot of stakeholder meetings, and we've been out to multiple events, Halloween events, the grand illumination, most recently Strawberry Fest with a booth, making sure these ideas, what we're representing tonight, and what's written in this plan, are really what we've heard from the community. We always say along this process, it's not our thoughts and vision, it's your vision, we're just here to help articulate it. And that's what you see these steps, or excuse me, these bullet points on the left hand of the slide, that's what it evolved to. We heard, we listened, it turned into basically 7 plan sections. The ones we've already reviewed here with this group were involved in growth management. Talked a lot about the land use, a very foundational piece of these plans, transportation, infrastructure, and economic development, and then most recently met with the advisory group back in May and talked about the rest of the plans. And so we're not going to go through all these in detail tonight, but just give you an overview of a section so as you look at the plan, react to the plan, can read to it, kind of know what's in there, and then we'll take a deep dive into the critical path strategies. With that, we talked about this a lot last time, what we call character classes. These are the future land use map. This is the foundation from a land use perspective of, as we work through this process, we listen to the community, where we think new growth should go, where growth that's already happened should stay the same or maybe be redeveloped, and really kind of, you look at this land use map, it might not get built out in 20 years, but if it were to be 20 years from now, what would that look like? Where would new residential go? Where would new mixed use go? New industrial, new businesses? They're all in here. Just a quick reminder what that looked like in the plan. Each character class has a description, a couple of examples of what an idealized version of that should be and what we're striving for. And then we talked about this last time, and I have a few slides later about the close-knit factor, which is a new concept we've come up with. I won't get into that too much detail just now since we're going to be kind of reiterating it. But also in here, as we think about the UDC and we transition to that process, kind of want to remind everybody that we've provided some pretty descriptive direction on what the uses should be for sure, but maybe some thoughts about what a character class looks like. What does it feel like when you're driving down the street? Setbacks, landscaping, things like that. We wanted to include a little bit more in this plan based on what we heard that was a little more direction-based for the code rewrite, as we heard so much about what it means to be part of this community and the close-knit factor of it, that what can we do to help articulate that in this plan and moving into the next effort. So if you're rereading things, that's kind of where all that came from. Talked a lot about transportation and maybe where complete streets, since the last time we were with this group, we went through an exercise with the advisory group and really kind of picked out which ones we think are the highest priorities. Doesn't mean this is only where complete streets could go in the community. There's another map in the plan that helps with that, but really these are the segments we felt were the ones that were the most needed now to help kind of keep that connectivity growing throughout the community.
Matt, before you get more specific,
Yeah.
I apologize. I've got to leave, but this slide, as well as the earlier slide regarding the public engagement, just maybe some advice for tomorrow night to emphasize these 2 slides. There has been a lot of interest and a lot of misinformation, frankly, just I think from lack of knowledge on Facebook and some other social media postings about just the unprecedented level of engagement that we've gotten from the public.
Absolutely.
That it's been very well advertised, that it's been very well commented on and continues to be. And then the complete streets concept, you know, I think we've talked plenty of times internally that is a very important aspect going forward, but that there's been a lot of scrutiny, not at the Planning Commission, but at more at the council level as far as discussion about where and when and how we can implement complete streets. Some of which may be unrealistic given the size and scope of the street and the street project, and maybe some conflicts that we might be setting up, pedestrians, cyclists, et cetera, for, you know, when we've got cars whipping by at 40 to 45 miles an hour. But, you know, clearly understanding how you came up with this chart, how you came up with those percentages, how you came up with these specific focal points as far as the segments go, that's something probably worth mentioning pretty thoroughly.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really appreciate that. I know we have a board dedicated to the public engagement process that'll be out on display during the open house. The format for that will be, you know, people coming in, we'll have a lot of boards set up, getting reactions. And on this slide, especially this, we went through a very specific facilitation to figure this out. And with that, I would say we haven't identified specific complete street improvements yet on these segments. These are just the segments that the community really felt were the most important ones to be thinking about. But we'll make sure we clarify all that. Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I really appreciate that. With that, we're going to dive into the critical path strategies, but before I do that, just wanted to point out one of those sections that became very important as we went through this process was attainable housing. Where could it be? What does that mean? What does it look like? So each section of the plan that you'll review as you're going through there and reading through it has a few key components that I wanted to highlight. I'm not going to read all these, but talking about public engagement, in each section you're going to see a piece that said, what did we learn? What did we learn? That's basically what we heard from the community, what we did in our research, all the things, where these recommendations came from. It's all baked into there. These are excerpts from the existing conditions report as well. Just all the data, that we're not making this up and pulling it out of nowhere. It all comes from these different aspects. What we heard is a little bit more specific to what we heard from the community through all of our public engagement efforts. What style of housing do they want? And that's a representation of what we heard in the online survey, with pictures and percents. To Patrick's point earlier, this is what we heard. This is what the community said they wanted. We just documented that, put it in the plan, and came up with some guidelines on how to do that. So each section is going to walk you through where those recommendations come from. Each one will have examples. Here we kept the same example. We started thinking about missing middle. People wanted architecturally to look a certain way. What could that possibly mean? We talked about micro units, accessory dwelling units. We'll get into that in a little bit. I think accessory dwelling units has probably fallen off more than more. We talked about that, but that's what a lot of the evaluation we went through this process to make sure that the recommendations and strategies that you see in each chapter are clearly articulated from what we heard, what we learned. With that, each section you'll see there'll be goals referred to that are relative to the whole plan that we talked about last time. And then you'll see objective statements, which are those bolded ones on top, which are a little more general, and then under each one of those, specific strategy. These are the action items for the plan. In total, there's around 54, and that's why we do critical path strategies, which we're going to get into. But each section that you read through that has been delivered is set up this way with this format. One, so it's easy to kind of walk through and interpret, but also, I've said this a few times, but I think in light of Patrick's comments, it's really important to us that we're taking everything we've heard through this whole process and condensing that into recommendations. And we want to clearly document where and how that came from. So that's really how these chapters are formulated. I mentioned Strawberry Fest. This is our most recent example of getting out there. We presented all the strategies. You can see them on those boards. Well, not all. I didn't put all the boards on the slide. But we got them out there, and we talked to a lot of people that evening. I would say at least 200, if I had to. I mean, we had really good response. A lot of people were at the festival on Friday night, which is great. There's a few images of it. You might even recognize the arms of that weird strawberry suit-looking guy with them poking out. They look really similar to these forearms. So we were there. We were getting attention, trying to do what we could. And you can see from our sticky dot exercise that evening that we feel like we really hit the mark right. There wasn't one that didn't have one dot on them. At least there was 2 or 3 on each one. And the really important ones, the ones we heard, you can see there's a massive dots over there. People really liked the ideas. They really liked what the recommendations were, and we're happy with the results. I'm ashamed to say, as an economic developer, those couple you see up there with the 2 or 3 dots are all economic development strategies, where I guess the community at large doesn't mind or care if Tim and I are out, folks like us are out there recruiting businesses as long as we're doing it. But they didn't bubble up to a priority. But at least I got a couple of people at least think about it, so that was good. So with that, we take every section and we take those strategies I showed earlier, and we boil that down through a process to the top 10 to 15 most important ones. And by important, I mean ones that the community, our steering committee, and even the city council weighed in on and said, here's the ones that we think are the ones we should really address in the next 5 years or so. So with that, we don't just pick those out of a hat. At our last advisory board meeting back in May, we went through an exercise where we had everybody rank and vote the ones that they thought were the most important. And when we do that, they get scored. Each one has a different score. And the ones that are really important, in this case 13, kind of bubble to the top. There's usually a pretty cutoff, like the top getter had 17 votes total. and then usually you have a few at 11, 12, 13, and then eventually you get to, there's one or two at 6, and then sort of fall after that. That's what happened here. But I really like to highlight that we didn't pick these strategies as the consultants. They came from the community and staff and the council, the ones they really thought made the most sense over the next 5 years. Also want to highlight, these aren't ranked in sort of order of importance that we heard that evening, so the one on top was not like the one that got the most votes. Working with staff, we really thought it made more sense to list them in what we thought was probably the nearest time frame for each one. So the ones you see at the top are ones that are more likely to occur in 0 to 2 years than they are, 3 to 5, if that makes sense. Any questions on this part so far before we jump into the specific implementation plans or how we got there?
Now, this is a reflection of what the previous slide showed.
Yeah.
Not just the Strawberry Festival, but the input off of all of.
This is from, all that engagement we've done throughout this process, all the advisory group meetings, all the online survey results, everything. Basically, and then that final vote all boiled down into this. And each one of those that you see on this slide at the table is listed in the plan in the individual sections. It's just, we picked the most important ones out of that whole plan development process and made them the priorities. So you'll see them repeated in one of the sections, and that's intentional.
Yeah, it's kind of deceiving because it does appear like the top one is the top priority. It was chosen, not necessarily the most.
Yep, sometimes we do list it that way, sometimes we do it chronological. It just, to me, when you look at all 13 of these, they're probably not going to happen in this order over the next 5 years, but these are the culmination of ones we think we really should try to implement over the next 5 years. Budget priorities or grant opportunities might come along where one of these, bumps up a couple of pegs. So it's a playbook, but it's not, it's not play-by-play, I guess is the right way to say that. Or Austin and Tim have the ability to call an audible, I guess, if we want to stick with a sports metaphor. Or make a check at the line of scrimmage. All right, I don't know how far I want to go with this. I've been watching too much preseason football. So in the plan, and don't worry about reading this slide, I just want to show you an example. We take those strategies, the critical path strategies, we turn into more of a very specific set of action items. So these two are related to the UDC we're going to be talking about earlier that bubbled out of the process, in particular to creating a multitude of housing options. What you'll see is kind of an explanation of the strategy, a very, these are chronological. These are steps that we think staff should undertake in order to accomplish this critical path strategy. And then the partners, timeframes, estimated cost, if eligible. They're all in there for each one of these. I just want to highlight that. But I know that's hard to read. So with that, we combine the first two, CPS 1 and 2, because they're really both zoning code related. So we think we're under this process. We wanted to make sure this was in here so that we had a lot of direction from the community that goes into that rewrite. But we kind of think they're going to happen at the same time. They just should. They're going to be baked into the zoning process as we reevaluate it. So the first one was develop standards that permit creative housing options. Really, this is about expanding availability of what we call missing middle housing, workforce housing, not necessarily any sort of subsidies or anything like that, just there's probably more housing types that people need than single-family homes at a certain price range. We'd like to see multiple price ranges, multiple types, townhomes, apartments, you name it. So we're going to be revising the zoning districts as we go through that process to create a mix of those unit types and make sure there aren't any basically unhidden barriers based on the language of the code. We really want to make sure that someone comes in, it makes sense on the right property, it matches what we put on the future land use map, that it's pretty easy to get in there and do that. The second part of this was looking maybe for incentives for certain kinds of housing. Really, when we started talking about this with staff and really worked out, we thought, if we're going to get creative with housing, downtown's probably the right place to do that, especially the example we've highlighted here is called micro-housing units. Back in the day, we used to call these efficiencies, where they're pretty much the same thing, a small living space where you live and you cook and you have a separate bathroom, and that's a bit, but they could be 350 square foot or so. These are starting to catch on in really expensive markets, and I think given the opportunities in downtown we'll talk about a little bit later with maybe converting second and third floor space into residential units or other types of use, this is a way to bring the cost down. A developer can develop this for a very similar cost to maybe a regular apartment unit, and rent it for the same cost, but if you're renting a $1,000 apartment at $2 a square foot, that's a $2,000 rent. You're doing this at 350 square foot you can still rent for that same $2, but your rent that month is $7.50. So it's just a creative way to create market rate housing. That was really important. That is definitely something we heard repeated by the community a lot. They want to see different and various types of market rate housing. So this was one solution we came up with to help provide that. And the more we talked about it with staff, the more we thought, this really makes sense in the downtown environment, in those mixed-use areas. It seems to be where the building stock is and really where you have a mix of amenities close by. So that's really it. We talked about incorporating it into other future land use districts, but as we really worked through it, this is the one that made the most sense. Any questions on those two? Because that's kind of a lot, and we're going to be talking about those a lot in the next couple of months with relation to the zoning code. All right. That's your name. This is one, as we started talking about park amenities, a lot of what we heard from the community was, we love our parks, they're great, not sure if we need a whole lot more space, would like to see more assets, more features. That was part of this. The other part is, that's what we heard, but when we did an analysis, and we talked about this at the beginning, there's a lot of park space in Troy. If you just look at the pure numbers, and a lot of them were in the 2019 audit, yeah, there's a lot of acreage, there's a lot of amenities, there's a lot of swing sets, you name it. But they're kind of concentrated on the eastern side of town, where the traditional parks have always been. As development continues to go in new areas, those service areas aren't necessarily as overlapping or as created. So what we've decided to do here is, right now the city's ordinances basically allow you to come in and say, I don't want to provide park space in a certain situation, I'll just pay a fee in lieu. We're thinking as part of the ordinance amendment, we'd really like to rework that so it's an option, but new land, especially in a service area that's pretty, basically an area of town that's underserved by parks, land or amenity donation has to be the first choice. And would give staff and the council and plan commission some ability to say, no, I think you really got to incorporate a park space because there isn't here for the residents to rely on in this neighborhood.
Well, isn't that discretional based on the park board's approval?
Yes. Yes, it would be. And we're going to try to build in some criteria, so we try to remove a lot of that discretion out of it. It's really, in these situations, this is the preferred option. But there's always a caveat or a process where if it doesn't make sense because the land is too steep or there isn't a good site, environmental conditions where you'd still be able to pay the fee in lieu of, we just really would like it to be considered to be the first option is land where it's needed for a new park. We heard a lot about parking in downtown. We have a few recommendations in the plan around that. There's some big ticket ideas that have been floated in the community. There's some others. We thought a really good interim step, and it's not available now, is there's a lot of parking in around the area based on the parking studies that the city had commissioned before we were involved that is being underutilized, and it's not maybe right in front of the store you want to go to, but it's not exactly forever away. We really think it would make sense to create both a physical and digital maps that map out all those parking areas. Pretty much can use the city's GIS system. We have an example here of the Near Me. I think you could probably bake that into it so you could just see what parking lot you're near to and how many spots there are. Do this through GIS, get it online. This is an online platform the city already offers. So really using the existing assets to just spread the word and help people find parking when it's maybe not right in front of the place they want to, but really want to encourage people to utilize the parking that is available, because something like a parking deck is a great idea for sure, but it's probably a ways away. And so we try to come up with some near-term practical solutions that might help mitigate some of that until those kind of decisions are made. The other thing we put in here is more of a future step. Once you go through this, the city could evaluate coming up with maybe a more digital way to track spaces. There are systems that exist where you basically have sensors that in parking decks and things that show you how many spots are available, how many aren't. You could go that route. Another route is some of the pay-for mobile applications that are out there, like Parking Spot. They actually do track that based on who's basically paid for their parking. It's not a perfect system, but if the city ever wanted to go to a metered type setup, that would be another way that you could help people find parking spaces as well, because it shows them on there and where those are available. Rental registration, this gets back to attainable housing. One of the things we heard from the community was that there are more and more single-family homes kind of being converted to rental properties. And I don't know if there's you want to say mitigate that. That's not really the point. what we want to do is make sure that there's good housing choices of various kinds. And sometimes our experience has showed us, we haven't noticed this in Troy so much, but other communities we worked in where if you have a proliferation of that, sometimes the necessary repairs and upgrades of the property aren't kept up with. A lot of times now you have landlords and owners that are from California that maybe aren't paying attention to local properties. Other communities in Ohio have implemented a rental registration and inspection program. We have an example of the plan from Centerville, where they kind of have the most robust one here just down 75, where if you're going to convert your single-family home or really any apartment into a rental, or you're going to build new apartments, you have to register that. They do that through Montgomery County. Montgomery has that system already in place. They take it one step further and require an actual inspection by the fire department every 3 to 5 years, and the building folks, where you got to make an appointment. You know, it's someone's residence. You can't just barge in, but you go in there and they look for maintenance issues, fire or safety issues, you know, lights that are out, exit signs if it's a commercial type building. But it's really a way to sort of accommodate that because it happens on its own in a lot of ways, but to make sure that those properties are upkept. And so that's something, when we started hearing that concern voice, we really started thinking, wow, what's a way to maybe help make sure that those properties, you know, maintain their value and maintain great over time, even if they have an out-of-town owner. And so that's really where that idea came from. Yep.
Has any community ever come up with one of those for owner-occupied homes? I think, you know, 'cause, I mean, one of the problems in Troy, is every community is people live in these shacks, you know, and it won't meet the rental criteria, but it's still the same problem.
Point of sale inspections is one avenue, so when the property sells, it has to be inspected by us before it's sold.
No, we don't have that in place, right?
No, we don't, but that is one avenue to help with that.
That'd be a tough one to sell, probably.
Yep, the other way would be just to examine the property maintenance code and see if there's any upgrades to that through the system. The problem, the harder part is unless you have point of sale, it's you have to get permission to access the inside of the home.
Right.
And so usually with rentals, when they turn over, that's a good time to do that. It's a little harder to do that with owner-occupied homes just because, you know, people live in their homes for multiple decades, we hope. And so that's a little stickier wicket. We didn't go there in this plan because the concern we heard was more about the rental properties, but.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting, I just, you know, curious.
Yep, there are examples that exist, for sure. This one might seem like a no-brainer, but we heard a lot about redeveloping the industrial properties that were in process of being demolished when we were here our first visit. We wanted to highlight this because it's so close to downtown, and it's got the river trail coming through. So many assets. If the dam gets removed, there's going to be even more interest in this area as the flood, you know, changes happen in the floodplain. Wanted to make sure that this is a priority for the city to. It's one thing to know you want to redevelop a property and see that happen. It's another to be a little more proactive. And so a lot of the steps, the action items you see in this are just making sure the city's on top of working with the development community, getting their ideas out there, communicating what's in this plan, because we have identified what you see in that orange box there is the downtown future land use zoning. So we'd like to see a little bit more of that replicated because we think it makes a lot of sense here. Making sure that, you know, that word's out there to really gain interest, get after it, and make sure that you can really promote the city's vision and what you want. Some of that might be even getting a little more proactive, developing concept plans that kind of showcase what you want. Or developing sometimes we call it a prospectus that shows the marketing opportunity, or if, you know, it ever stalls out, some cities have started getting more aggressive and actually going out and purchasing the property. And so that's kind of a last-ditch item, but we wanted to include it in here just in case that was something that ever became feasible or viable. This is a very economic development-focused one, but we did hear over and over and over again that the community felt business attraction, jobs were important. Troy is a job center. We'd like to keep that going. The future land use map certainly accommodates a lot of that. So this is, I guess we could just call this the TIM strategy, if we wanted to. It's basically things that I used to do in the public sector and best practices that I've learned over the years that can help you sort of ratchet up those efforts, like making sure you're going to the right trade shows, going out and interviewing all existing businesses in your industry cluster. When we went through what we call shift share analysis, we basically found out that there is a cluster, a very deep concentration of food manufacturing and metal fabrication. Those folks have suppliers, they have little businesses that help, build little parts that feed into theirs. All kinds of things can spin off of this. But in order to do that properly, and I know this from my public sector days, is you almost have to become an expert in those industries to be able to talk that language, sell the things that they sell, and really find out what's important to them from a site perspective, from a utility perspective. So this critical path strategy is all about that. And the infographic we showed here is just people that we talked to through the online survey and our engagement events. They couldn't say enough about the proximity to I-75 and how related that is to being a job center, and how important that is to make sure that that's an asset that's identified, to make sure that, that is something that is amplified and really worked on by the community. I mentioned this a little bit ago, and this is coming back. There are really great examples out there of programs that provide 50-50 matching funds. I myself created one in St. Charles where we only did the facade of the building, and then we decided to go inside. The problem we observed is the cost was so high, even if somebody had a good business model or wanted to convert to an apartment, there just wasn't enough funding there to make it viable because you couldn't charge enough rent. The market just wouldn't bear it. So an example would be to create a 50-50 matching fund for necessary physical improvements. For sure, when you convert older buildings, the first one that comes up is fire sprinklers, or sprinkling those buildings. That's always a very expensive endeavor. So is there a 50-50 matching fund for that, and a program that can be created? There's a few funding sources we identified. Could be general funds, could be community foundation, revolving loan funds, zero interest. There's a number of ways to work through this, but we've recommended that the city really kind of think through that and take that on. The only thing I would always recommend is never pay for anything what I would call quote-unquote temporary, that can be ripped out. Things like fire sprinklers, plumbing upgrades, electric boxes, those things all make sense. Furniture, seating, desks, that kind of stuff. I stay away from that because you want to make sure, and I think, the citizens would like to see this as a permanent improvement, really upgrading the building over time, not just, helping one person do one thing one time. So that would be like kind of one of the barriers to entry, I would say. Mentioned parks a little bit ago. I think taking that one step further, the audit was a great start. We've recommended that the next step to that would be to create an official Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Typically, they have a 5-year kind of reset on those to get started, and we heard so much about parks and how much people love parks, but we did hear there was a few amenities that were missing. That we saw a lot of repeats. There's a lot of ball fields, a lot of swing sets, a lot of things like that. People would like to see a little more variety out there in the park spaces. So we really think this is an important step to not only help identify those, but once you have a Parks and Rec plan, it makes it easier to apply for what's called land water conservation funds, which is there's a whole process to that, but basically at its core is Ohio DNR has funds available where they can do 50-50 matching grants to help pay for those improvements. A plan like this is not required. I want to make sure I point that out to apply for those grants, but if you have that background, it certainly gives you points on your application because it is a competitive application.
Was there a category of recreation they claim we don't have enough of?
It was Splash Pad was the one that was overwhelmingly resounding, but there were some other people would like to see maybe more nature trails, more nature areas. I would say in a general sense it was more passive activities, seating areas, meditation gardens, community gardens, that kind of thing. Basically but youth-focused activities, or just more of them. Not that there are some, but they'd like to see more of that.
Well, there may be a limit in the nature trails within the corporate limits, but you go just outside the city limits and there are plenty of them.
Yep, I don't disagree. I think some of the connectivity to trails regionally through here is awesome. But folks tend to view their community as their neighborhood, and so that. We always have to view our recommendations and what we hear from the community kind of in that prism, like what's their 2-mile radius from their house, basically, or place of business. And so that's what we were hearing. We also felt this was important from an economic development perspective, because when we talked to business owners, they also said, hey, the quality of life here, the parks, downtown, all those things, is a huge attractor. When we bring potential tenants here or suppliers, we bring them right to downtown or the parks and show them all the cool stuff that's here. So. Just elaborating on that and continuing to build on it. It's not just a residential plus. It's a business attraction strategy as well. And that's becoming more and more common when I talk to businesses with our private sector work to say, like, what are you looking for when you're looking for a community? So, this one is specific to downtown. It kind of builds on that theme of providing more amenities, but something we heard a lot from the community was, we'd like to see more things to do in downtown that, aren't just the businesses. They're more either activity-based or youth-based or just someplace to hang out where our kids can hang out. So I know there's a lot of efforts being thought about that. There's a new design guideline document and kind of thought process there. There's the riverfront plan that really thought big picture, parking decks, pedestrian bridges over the river, all those. After we reviewed those, we took a step back and said, all right, those kind of recommendations, and this is probably a theme through the whole plan, is those kind of things are already been thought of. Troy's always on top of doing those things and thinking through those things. What can we do that's more of an interim step that maybe hadn't been thought of? And so basically we were thinking in slower times or when you just want to have a new event or just a new feature for people. This is kind of an accident of COVID, but these parklets started getting developed, so you could use more streets and parking for outdoor dining when we had all the occupation restrictions. Those are starting to evolve into various kinds of temporary seating areas, so you could just build it on a platform and put it down on a couple of parking spaces, or if there's a sidewalk that's wide enough, and people get to enjoy it. It's a new feature, and then it goes away during busy times when you need that parking or you need that sidewalk space. The thought being not just to accommodate what we heard from the residents. Like any attraction, there's always a newness factor. A new restaurant opens, it's really busy, and then the regulars start going there. You build a new park, a lot of people love it, and the attendance goes up, but it always falls down a little bit. This is a way to kind of keep things always evolving and fresh. It's a new way to, the temporary art program, I think, in downtown is a great example of this, where you always have a new reason to come back and see that new thing. And this is kind of a less or more inexpensive way to do that. I'm sorry.
Was there a perception that you were hearing that there's not enough to do in Troy?
No, the perception we heard specifically in this case was there's nothing for my kids to do in downtown while I'm out socializing. You want to point to one specific example.
Okay. Back many years ago, when I was service director, we had a teen leadership Troy, and they made the comment to me that there's nothing to do in this city. And I said, when I was growing up, I said the same thing. And I grew up in Cincinnati. So I don't know of anywhere where especially the youth, think there's enough to do.
That's constant in our work, for sure. I think in this case, it was more smaller children, like the 7, 8, 9 range they were referring to, and I think the door had something to do with it, and so people are walking around just hanging out as adults. They want a place for their kids to hang out, too, so call it a babysitter by tree, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it. But also, I think there's the image on the bottom is actually a projection that you can rent or buy projectors that make these really deep interactive things. The example I refer to, my son got sick a while ago. He turned out to be fine. I don't want to belabor it, but we were waiting in the ER because he's having some swelling in his neck, and they had a koi fish pond that was all digital. And like when you stepped on it, the bubbles went, the fish scattered, and all that. They've now developed that concept in cities where you could project these movable walkways that kids or adults or anybody can interact with. So just one more way to kind of use your existing infrastructure, your sidewalks, Prouty Plaza, and just do some unique things once or twice or 5 times a year. Just another way to continue to encourage people to always come downtown, always come to other parts of town where you want to emphasize activity. Could be in the parks, could be anywhere, but we focused on downtown because that's what we heard. But this could even be, an extension of the Grand Illumination. One of the case studies we showed was San Francisco does this whole art light exhibit throughout the holidays where they got projections on buildings, on the sidewalk, everywhere. So just one more idea. It's really, for me, with downtowns, it's always about coming up with ways to keep it fresh for people, to make sure you want them to have that continual interest, continual reason to keep coming downtown. My engineer will be here later if anybody wants to come back to help me explain this, but essentially when we started evaluating infrastructure, we noticed there's certainly pinch points in the system, some capacity upgrades that might be needed as the community develops out. Nothing's needed imminently, but something to think through. So we're recommending, and the committee kind of bubbled this one up to the surface, to do what's called a water modeling and wastewater modeling study, where they go out there and they look at all the systems and kind of really gauge exactly what's what. So you have a really good idea of what impacts that might have to your future system as development comes in. And the final one, gets back to that parking idea. Again, we heard a lot about parking not being right next to the businesses or as convenient as we would prefer. We heard I know the parking deck was a concept that was evaluated, and that came up a lot. It was a parking deck, makes sense. We started looking at downtown and basically said, there's a lot of parking near downtown. It's maybe not the best, most convenient walk, but especially you go across the river from downtown, there are big parking lots there by the parks, by the arena, the high school. Can we do something to encourage people to use those in busy times and make it convenient for them that's a lot cheaper than a parking deck? And so what we came up with, and I think it was the last time I was here in this room talking to this group, the mayor mentioned this, in San Diego, they've done this with small electric golf carts. It's basically like microtransit, where you can have a fixed route, get you to the parking lots on the busy nights, and have folks basically, it's kind of a concierge service that they run out there, and you get dropped off right next to the business you want, but you can still find parking that's less convenient. But in combination with that map we recommended earlier, really interesting way to help maybe encourage people to utilize more parking features that exist. Especially, when the arena doesn't have an event going on. There's a big parking lot over there, so why couldn't that be a Friday night parking if it's available? So that was the basic concept here, is what can we do to encourage people to use existing assets? Again, it's kind of a interim recommendation, somewhere between map and parking deck, but one we really felt, especially after we started thinking about it, there is so much parking here, let's just get people to use it, and ferrying them around, I think, is one good way to encourage that. So I'm going to stop there. Those are the 13 critical path strategies. That is the implementation chapter of the plan, and see if there's any other questions, comments, thoughts. Please, somebody want to take a sip of water? Anything you saw in there, you're like, oh God, they can't do that.
Well, you did say that a parking garage would be way off in the future, because I would have some real reservations about that. I know each community is different, but when I worked in Saginaw, Michigan, they built a parking garage and nobody used it because they thought it was dangerous.
That is a perception we hear too. And yeah, we didn't put anything about parking decks in our plan because the other plans that issue's kind of been studied a lot in Troy. And that's another reason why we focused on more of a near-term solution that utilizes existing assets. So you can, maybe this works and it takes off, and you never need to think about a parking deck again. It could happen. Or I need some exercise. Maybe I'll just start up a rickshaw business where I pedal people around in the summer. All right, great. With that, we're going to talk schedule a little bit, but we're kind of nearing the end of the process. This is going to be out for public comment for a while, about a month. We're going to have our open house tomorrow night. Any feedback as you guys read through that plan, and anything you think we need to tweak or anything we want to reconsider, by all means, send those to Austin. He'll send them to us. We'll get those comments made. We'll get them in there. And then you'll see them in the public hearing draft as we're back in front of this group as part of the formal adoption process. With that, we did want to spend a little bit of time talking about the Unified Development Code, since we're transitioning a little bit more. We've been working on that for a while now, but that's going to be more front and center as we keep moving forward. I talked about this last time and just wanted to have a few extra slides because we know it's a new concept. We know there's a lot to think through here, and we've done a little bit of that in some slides we presented to the advisory group last time. I wanted to start there just to know that we're thinking through this, and we're thinking about how it's not just in the plan, but what happens in the code to make sure that this actually means something. This close-knit factor, just a quick recap, was there are certain land uses as they develop further away from town that may detract if they're not thought of properly from kind of that, what we heard over and over and over again. I couldn't tell you how many times is, we love our close-knit community, we want to keep it close-knit. So what are some things we can do to make sure that new development honors basically that sentiment? So what we've come up with, and this isn't final yet, we're still working through that. I just wanted to show everybody this because we're switching into zoning code writing mode, and that's where this is going to end up, is what we think is basically you have a close-knit factor. I don't think score is the right word. We're not trying to discourage any type of development or think it doesn't work. It's really, hey, if you're 3 or below, you might wanna consider some extra things or require some extra things, just to make sure that those are gonna be part of the community and that your new development is integrated into the community. With that, on the right column, you see number of offsets required. So we've come up with a preliminary list of offsets, so let's say you're a single dwelling attached, developments of townhomes, by common lexicon. You would have, and you're on the periphery of town, it might make sense to develop there, the land use map might match, but we want you to do a couple extra things just to make sure that you're providing opportunities for community and close-knit factor, and that's, I guess, I've gotta work on that verbiage, as part of your plan. So you have to look at 3 options on this bullet point list. There could be more, we're still developing that, but these are just some examples, such as installing extra trails, contributing to complete streets, putting a community garden in there, and that gets back to that, we want land instead of a fee in lieu of for a park in case it makes sense for where that community is gonna be located. Building a pavilion, building a way for people to interact, provide parking lot. Some of these are more commercial, retail-based, but providing parking lot landscaping that's in excess of what the code requires, architectural building enhancements, things like that. And then on this slide, we wanted to come up with some bigger impact ones. We're not sure if 2 offsets is the right offset, but we kind of, if we go back to this slide, that let's say you're required to have 3 offsets. You pick one item on this list, it'll count as 2. It could be 3, we're still working through that, but these are kind of bigger investments, you know. Installing solar panels over the parking lot areas as a way to offset it. If you're doing a retail commercial development, think of like a big box like a Meijer, do something with that parking lot or in the middle of the parking lot that encourages community, like a communal eating place, or outdoor eating place, a outdoor place to watch movies in the summer or have concerts. Something that creates a community vibe as opposed to just a parking lot and a new retailer. And so that's really, as we continue to develop this thought, I just want to highlight that. That's something we're going to bake into the zoning ordinance, but wanted to kind of have that because I don't think this group has had a chance to review that yet. I want to make sure we highlighted that this evening. Let's see if there's any questions, thoughts on that. Or if you have suggestions or things you want to add to these lists, by all means, send those to us as well.
Yeah, these last 2 slides, these are actually, this is from the content in the proposed plan?
It is not, and that's the other reason I want to highlight it. This will end up in the zoning code. Well,
right. Okay.
I apologize, it's half and half. It's probably a ways back, but, so in the future land use section, each future land use is described as a character class, and that the closeness factor and the description of what that means specific to each land use is there. It's on the top left of the right page there, where it has the 2. And so that is what will tie to those slides we just looked at, because basically this table or a version of it and these criterion will be baked into the zoning ordinance. And so that's how the connection.
Those have been totally developed? Or?
They have.
Okay.
Yeah, these are literally, I wanted to get this out here so you were familiar with it as we start writing the code in more depth. But also, I mean, if these are the right ideas, awesome. If they're not, we want to know that too.
Right.
And so, yeah, they're really for evaluation.
I had an understanding of how they stood in the process.
Yeah, I think the best way to probably summarize it is this part will not be approved with the comp plan as that goes. This will be part of the zoning ordinance update officially. And that's why we put it in the slide deck in this order because that's a pretty good transition to what David's going to talk about. Any other thoughts or questions on it?
Well, I guess I'm concerned about, I know you're not talking about Section 8, but you're talking about making 5% of the housing in a area available to lower income families. I think that could be detrimental to a lot of neighborhoods.
And that's why we picked 80% of annual median income. And that really comes from just housing models that say those are not subsidized homes, they're just people at a certain annual income level. And for a family of 4, 80% of annual median income around here is like $68,000 right now. So and there would be no subsidies associated with it. It's just figure out a way to make a unit that's affordable to someone in that price range.
I would be very reluctant to have the city enforce such a rule.
And that's great feedback. That's what we want to know. these are ideas we're coming up with. That one stems from that attainable housing, comment, or thread of comments we heard a lot about. I worked in a community and administrated and wrote a inclusionary housing ordinance that required these things. I can attest to the fact that it's very hard for the development community to get their head around because it throws their performer off. But we wanted to at least represent it since we heard so much about this, about just housing that, someone that works in one of the local businesses, someone could afford. And so this is one idea we came up with, but as we go through the process, if we need to strike it, by all means, we can.
I would have a problem with it.
Sure. Yep, we'll make a note of that, and we can look at other potential ways to encourage that.
And that is just, I would also add, this is one option, right? They would have multitude of options to hire a close-knit factor. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Austin. I touched on this, but the idea here is to have a bunch of options, and the developer would only have to do 3 or 2 or whatever. But it's kind of a taster's choice based on their site, what works for them. And so that, we were trying to come up with a lot of options to help encourage or really give people a lot of opportunity to meet this, but not really mess up what they're planning on doing with their development. Any last thoughts, or we're going to have a lot more time to talk about this one, thankfully, as we continue through the code rewrite. All right, and with that, I will turn it over to David. Thank you.
So thanks, Matt. So we've used the word zoning code a lot, and I want to, for obvious reasons, but I want to talk a little bit up front about a term that we're starting to use, which is Unified Development Code. And so that is when you put together your zoning ordinance, your subdivision regulations, and your sign code. Today, for your city, they're separated. So when we complete this process, we want to have what we refer to as a Unified Development Code. There's lots of reasons to do that, but the biggest one is it really makes sure there are not any conflicts that exist between the different codes, and it makes it easier once you get used to it for both staff and for the development community, because they're going to one place. So that's with that. I want to make sure everyone understands that concept. That is what we're moving towards, and we think that's going to be a big improvement from the process that you currently have. So with this new Unified Development Code, some of the big goals that we have is, of course, we want to make sure that we're consistent and comply with state and federal law. There are areas of the code that are old and need some legal updating, so we're going to be ensuring of that. We want to make sure the code is user-friendly. We are going to have graphics, tables, and charts to help with the ease of information. And then we want to make sure that the code aligns with the comprehensive plan. So, when we use the word align, we do have some flexibility with that. So there are a lot of plans and goals that are listed in the comprehensive plan, but there are different ways that we can achieve that through the code. So any questions on that before, because that's a kind of a big picture of where we're going. Okay. So with that, this is just a chart to kind of look through our process that we go through. Right now, you'll see on the left-hand screen, as I'm at left-hand side of the slide as we're looking at it, that you see the terms annotated outline and code audit. So that's really the step that we're on right now. We have not gotten to drafting, making full drafts of chapters of this new UDC, but we're really studying the code that you currently have, and so that's what we mean by code audit. So I'm going to show you guys some slides that we've already shown your staff, and we received some feedback, but we very much completed this reviewing of your current code. in conjunction, with the comp plan, and so we're starting to think about next steps, which those next steps are the drafting. Of course, we'll go through a very similar process, for the drafting of this code that we did with the comp plan, which is having a staff review, presentation to Planning Commission, and then ultimately, hopefully, adoption by your city council. So with this, I do want to show kind of where we're at in this project schedule. With the comp plan, we're looking at the adoption being in September, and then we're really going to start, after this site visit, start with the drafting and giving to some of the introductory chapters and some of the things that we've been working on as far as tables. So when we're here next, for the code portion of it would be in October. September is going to be the adoption of the plan process. So you can see from that I'll be here a good bit through in October, November, January, and February as we move forward in this process. So again, that keyword code audit, I'm not going to show every the complete code audit, but I'm going to show a slide that goes into the heart of each of the deliverables that we've sent so far. So an annotated outline is basically, it's basically a big table of contents that shows where your old sections of the code are and how it's going to be organized in the new section. Now, when we put in previous ordinance sections, I have gotten questions from similar boards. Are you meaning that you're just going to bring over the old text? No. It means that it's a similar provision. It may be that we're bringing over text. If that is text that is consistent with the comp plan, is good moving forward, but it's basically that issue. So if there are elements within that don't address the issue appropriately, then there's going to be a lot of change in that. But if your current text addresses it adequately, then there's going to be much less edits. But this can serve as a really good piece after this process is done, because for staff it'll be very easy to say, okay, I know that in the old code it was at section 113.2, and they can put that into their computer, and then they can say, okay, now I know exactly where that is in the new one. It's going to be much more intuitive for the user, but there is a little bit of, just getting used to something that's new, of course. So, land use adjustment table, this is a portion of that, but one of the key things we noticed right up front with the code that you currently have is you have a lot of names and terms for things that are very, very similar. And this is one that really stuck out for us, which was retail sales. Everything that you see, florist, gift shop, newsstand, drugstores, all of these function very similar. They are retail sales. Somebody will park their car, or they're walking down the street if it were downtown, and they're going into a store, they're buying something, and they're leaving with that. It functions the same way. However, in your code, you have all of these different terms, and some of them have significant overlap. Florist and gift shop, great, and those are the top two, or the first two up there. It's a good example. There are a lot of shops that they sell flowers and they also sell gifts. And when there's one that is permitted in one zoning district and not in another, it becomes very difficult for staff to figure out, okay, is this truly a florist or is this truly a gift shop? And when they function the same way, there's no reason for us not to consolidate all of those. It makes it a lot easier with the interpretation. And what we find, and is the case here and is the case with pretty much almost all of our clients, is that we find that the code is actually a little bit too restrictive than it needs to be. So it provides more economic development opportunities because it will allow for more approvals in more locations. So we find that is a good concept. Yes?
Well, And I understand what you're saying, but
Mhm.
I guess if you're not specific enough and you simply say retail sales, perhaps then retail sales would include marijuana shops.
Sure, and so we would do want to make sure that we're creating a definition for this. So every land use is going to have a definition, and if it's something like that that may have some significant community concern, then we can take that out of retail sales. That's a great example. We could sit and have that as a separate category. So I do certainly understand that concern, but a lot of these that function on the list, I guess the only one maybe on that list, could even come close, just at first glance, would be cigarettes, tobacco. But if there is anything and that's a good example, we will create an additional land use for that because of the impact that it could be for the community. Yeah.
The one on that list, we see a lot of the cigar and cigarette shops, base stores.
Yeah.
Oftentimes our clients would like us to pull that out separate, just for that reason.
Yeah. And so that's one we can look at. There are cities that would say, no, let's just keep that all together. But if that's a concern, then we can have that as a separate land use. Okay. Any other questions on this? So we also do a review of both this body and the Board of Zoning Appeals body to see what are the cases or what are the issues that are coming before them. This is very similar to a lot of other jurisdictions we work with the BZA. We see a lot of requests for variances, issues relating to setbacks. So we know we're going to take a hard look at each of those that have come before, and we're going to see if there's a way that we can create approvals that maybe don't have to come before the BZA. So at some point, as we go through the code process during this process, it'd probably be good to have a BZA meeting to have with this group to talk about this specific issue. But this is one we come up with a lot. We've found some creative ways to allow for some approvals without there having to be a meeting. So again, that would be if we see a consistent pattern with those approvals. So that's something we're going to dig into a little bit more. Planning Commission action, same thing. We do a review of what this body takes a look at. This is probably not going to be a surprise to you. I will say that this comes from 2019 to today. You have a lot with historic zoning. I know you have that new historic guidelines. We certainly don't want to be rewriting those because those are good standards that apply to in the standard. They link good with the standards of the interior. So we have talked about, is it potentially a way to have administrative approvals from that? I will say it's harder to do that with historic guidelines because of that keyword guideline. It allows for some interpretation with the board, and so that's why you see less administrative approvals. But I just wanted to show this slide to show that that's probably where the primary items that are coming before you are. Now, the secondary one that we see is rezonings. That was not a surprise to us at all, and the reason for that is in a few slides in the future, you'll take a look at it, but you have a lot of zoning districts that are very, very similar, and you also have a lot of plan development approvals, which you'll see is the next one below it. So there are times where we think that the objective can be obtained without having to have a rezoning, and so I'll explain more about that in a future slide. But what we're really trying to do with this is to take a look and analyze, okay, is there a way that from a policy perspective that you as a board are comfortable with, can it be approved administratively? Because if it can be, then that's a reduction in the amount of the process that an applicant has to come through. And we find that this is really helpful for companies that are looking to maybe come to Troy, or because there are people that have that, and we used to work with one who had a job where he was working for an industry, and basically they get down in the selection process and say, it's between these two cities, please tell me which one has the easier zoning code, or the less ambiguous code would be a good way to put it, because that's a real fear for these. So that's one of the things we're really trying to do, is reduce the ambiguous provisions so that there's a lot more clarity. This is just showing this in another way, but you can see there that historic zoning, the historic district and the rezoning really pop up. This delves deeper. From the previous slide, it talked about the largest of the historic district were the exterior improvements. You can see we've separated it out, and we see that multiple improvements. So really an application that comes in that's talking not just about a door, not just about roofing, not just about one thing, but it's a multiple, basically all of these together. It's a little bit easier to do administrative approvals when it's just the door or it's just the window, but you're having more consolidated applications, which means you're going through multiple issues, which in that case can be better for it to be done at the Planning Commission level. We've also done a legal scan from state and federal law to take a look at what is not compliant today. There are some issues as it relates to a very recent U.S. Supreme Court case. That case is referred to as Reed v. Gilbert. And so I won't go into too much detail on this, but essentially sign codes today need to be what's referred to as content-based. And so that means that are not content-based. So in general, and there are some exceptions to this rule, but if you have to read the sign to figure out how to classify it, then that is a good way of saying it is content. So we need to move to regulating signs by the size, the types of signs, that kind of thing. So when we get into this, you'll see that that's how we're going through the process. Regulation of religious and non-religious land uses, we're going to take a hard look at that. The approach we take a look at is to use the term place of worship or assembly, because then we know we are treating a religious land use versus a non-religious land use the same. This issue, this law is about 10 years old, maybe a little bit older, but it actually came about in an odd way, which was, and I'll give in a personal example here. I have a brother-in-law who is a Methodist minister, and he would hold Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday night Bible studies at his house. And so there were places where the code would actually say, the cities that, and this is very typical, where it would say church, and it would give a definition. Well, actually having those many members over to their house would actually meet the definition of church. So that's where a concern in religious liberty came in. A lot of times people think that this was a law to hurt churches, but in reality it was actually passed for the exact opposite reason. So we'll be using those terms, place of worship, place of assembly. The third thing that we really noticed is the regulation of group homes. We're still working on the review of this. There is federal law on this, and there is state law. It is because of both of those levels of law, it is very intertwined and it's very complex. I will say in other states it's a little bit easier to know how to regulate that, but we have multiple clients right now in Ohio, and we're taking a real hard look to figure out what we think the best path forward will be, and to make sure that everyone is, or that both you and our other client in Ohio currently on a code project will be compliant. So this is the zoning district adjustment table. I mentioned this before, and I mentioned the concepts of streamlining. I mentioned that you had a lot of previous rezonings. With that, this is a table that's been reviewed by Austin and staff. And this is an important table because what is on the right as we're looking at it states the newly proposed base zoning districts. That's going to be the start of our zoning district drafting and writing. So on the far left, you see where it says comprehensive plan character class. That is what we've listed in the comp plan and what's moving forward as a type or a feel of a certain area of town. We've linked that to your current zoning, and then we've shifted that over to a proposed base zoning district. The idea here is that one character class should ideally equal one base zone, when I say base zoning district. So the idea is if you have a character, the character should be very similar to the zoning district. So when we see multiple zoning districts that are intended to meet the same character class, we think, well, there may be a chance here to consolidate the zoning districts.
Would that eliminate, for example, setting the number of square feet required in a lot?
Oh, no. There are ways we can do through additional use standards that can allow for that. So there are ways to make those type regulations, but that don't have to be a quote unquote new zoning district. So as we go through the process, we'll make sure to highlight how that works, and we'll explain that a little bit further. But for right now, this doesn't necessarily mean these are going to be the zoning districts that we end up with, but this is kind of our first take, if you will. And we do think there's a lot of opportunity to consolidate zoning districts. The single-family residential districts that you see, that's kind of what jumps off. A lot of them are very, very similar, and they are just a difference from lot dimensions. And a few of them they're so minute that literally and I have done this, I've literally driven this down a street, and I could not tell the difference between the two. So what we're going to do is lay out how we could consolidate this, and then after that occurs, we're going to show that to staff, and then staff is going to take a hard look at that. But I do believe that is something that could be a substantial improvement for your code, so that it doesn't have to be these very small lot dimensions that are in a separate district. Okay. A couple other things that we're looking at consolidating: your office commercial and your OC1 and local retail are very, very similar. We've put that into potentially a neighborhood commercial district. And then also the light industrial. The differences there are just a couple different land uses. The one area that, and we thank staff for their feedback on this, we do have a character class of regional commercial, but when we looked at it, it would be very difficult to split those two existing districts, that B2 and B4. So right now we're going to keep those separate. Some of the land uses with parking sales have to do with that. But so any questions on this? Again, doing this, the devil is in the details, but I do at this point want to kind of show you where we're going in our initial drafting. Okay. So with that, just really want to thank you guys. Myself, obviously Matthew O'Rourke's our group leader. In my capacity at American Structure Point, and I know I've addressed this board before, just to reiterate, is really working on these Unified Development Code and zoning projects. So this is really the heavy part that I get involved with our jurisdiction. So with that, I can open it up for any questions that you may have on the zoning code portion.
Well, I haven't seen any, when this started, I wanted to impress on you that I want this in plain English.
Sure.
That anybody can understand, and not jargon that, folks who have had PhDs in planning are using.
Sure. And I certainly remember that, and that is our goal. I jokingly like to say, even though I am an attorney, I do like it to be in plain English. It is a skill to translate from legalese to plain English, but that is definitely our goal. If when you're reviewing this, you see any of that in it, please let us know, and we'll modify it. But a large part of Troy's English, or Troy's code is not as bad on this as some that we work with. I will say that, your existing code. But I've had a couple of clients where literally I had to understand legalese at a pretty high level to be able to even translate it into plain English. So that is definitely a goal of ours, and we're going to do that. But having said that, if there's any little individual words that you feel it could be in more plain language, then please let us know. Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys, and look forward to presenting in the future to this board when we start really rolling out those draft sections of the new UDC.
Okay.
It'll be new business next, and then we don't have any new business, so we can adjourn.
Okay, hearing that there is no new business or other business.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion?
Wait, we don't have a quorum.
I
think you can adjourn without a quorum.
You can adjourn without a quorum.
Yeah.
Adjourn.
Restate aye.
Executive decision.